Welcome, everybody. This is you're in for a real treat today. We have here Yupeng Jiao, who is a doctor of history or soon to be doctor of history.
Uh-huh.
Are you a doctor yet? Are you
Not yet. I'll
not
defend
yet?
my
Okay,
dissertation in just a few months.
awesome.
So almost
So
there.
you're in for a real treat because we're going to talk about the what you might call roughly martial arts cults. We'll get into what to call them
Uh-huh.
in the early part of the 20th century, and this is a really important issue for martial arts studies and should be of interest in general to people interested in religion and
Uh-huh.
martial arts. And I've read the first two chapters of his dissertation, and they're really exciting.
Uh-huh.
And I think everyone is going to be excited. Everyone's going to be exciting and excited. And Yupeng is from China, from Henan, is it?
Yeah, Hunan
Yeah.
province.
And his research, at least, is from Poyang,
Yeah, Poyang County in Jiangxi province in southern China.
which everybody knows at this point because its nearest city is Wuhan.
Yeah, not far from Wuhan.
So that's kind of exciting.
Uh-huh.
You're going to get some background to that region, I think, in this talk. And you're currently at University of San Diego.
University of California, San Diego.
Right.
Uh-huh.
UC San Diego. Cool. So your work, your original research, if I understand it correctly, and we'll just so people know what we're going to get to,
Sure,
because we're going to have to do the setup for it. But the original research has to do with interviews that the Communist Party officials did with captured people who were part of martial arts rituals.
Right, definitely. So to the communists, they are basic criminals, right? Especially in the 1950s, it's one of the largest group of what the Communist Party called the counter-revolutionaries. So basically means they are totally against the new regime, against socialism. So the party arrested thousands, numbers of this group of people. So the primary sources I use money from the public security system in the early People's Republic. And so it's like confessions, interrogations, that kind of legal documents.
So interesting. All right, let's do a little background. So I gave you this list of scholars that
Right.
you mostly mention in your dissertation: Elizabeth Perry, Susan Naquin, David Owenby, Rebecca Netostep. Maybe we could add a few people to that list.
Sure.
But there's and one of the things I can do on this is I can put things up on the screen. So, I can do that after the fact. So
Sure.
I can put books up there and stuff. So feel free to reference further out, especially things that are visual. Like I could put a map up there. So bandits. Okay, so we have this thing happening in the Qing dynasty, right? We'll talk about the end of the Qing dynasty period, where you have bandit culture, if we could call it that, bandit culture happening, and then you have this sort of militia culture,
right?
And then you have a particular government tradition called baojiao, baojiao system, and which is a type of militia system, but not the only type. Right. And then you have these what have been loosely called secret societies, or the Chinese government called them
the Huidaomen.
Huidaomen.
Yeah.
Which means societies of the sword.
Huidaomen mainly is like all types of voluntary organizations at the local level.
But the direct translation of Huidaomen is
I don't think we really have direct translation in English. And sometimes I use secret societies. Sometimes I use, religious redemptive societies. But in general, I think really it referred to all the local voluntary association with a religious background.
And that are self-defense, have
Right.
some
Yeah.
self-defense or self-organization
Uh-huh.
principles. And there's hundreds of them, right?
Yeah, hundreds of them. Yeah, you can never number, how many were there in the 20th century. So I think the big difficulty of studying this group of people is that you never know how many were there in the 20th century and how widespread they are, because you mentioned several different actors in the local governance, and also basically the environment in rural China during the first half of the 20th century is basically so chaotic. You don't really have a very strong central government, and all the local power holders try to play a really significant role in the local politics. So everybody try to get involved. Not only the local elites, but also the poor people as well. They try to form their own self-defense groups to protect themselves from not only the bandits, the outside threats, but also the government, taxation, forced conscription, something like that.
Okay, wait. So you jumped to after 1916, right?
Not necessarily. I think it's basically what's going on from the late Qing to the 1950s.
To the late teens. Yeah, that's what I meant. So from the late teens to 1950s. But before that, because in among martial artists, this is the really the whole area is gray. People don't know what's going on. They don't get it. But this period before, just as a background, we mentioned you mentioned David Robinson's work, where he's really talking about the end of the Ming Dynasty,
right?
Where you have this. He starts out his book with this outrageous story where the emperor and his brothers are playing some kind of soccer game with these bandit leaders, and then he says, "How could this have happened?" Right? What's going on? And he describes the way in which local elites negotiated power with bandits in order to keep a kind of peace, which was really quite warlike and chaotic all the time.
Yeah, I think literally we know very little about bandits and their relationship with the local elites and even the national elites, like in the imperial capital. So I think the boundary between what you call a bandit and local people is really fluid and really, there's no clear boundary. So there are many studies about, bandits in late Qing and the early Republican period. So you can say during a peaceful time, maybe people are just ordinary peasants, local landlords, but during times of social unrest, these people can instantly turn and become bandits and start to rob the surrounding areas. So the general feeling I have from this group of people is that the super high intensity of insecurity in rural China. So everybody can turn to predatory, activities, just like, Elizabeth Perry mentioned the two different types of survival strategy in rural China. One is a protective, you need to protect yourself from bandits, from all external threats. The other one is predatory. You turn into bandit to rob other people. But actually, I think in reality, people can be both, right? Sometimes they become bandits, and during times of harvest, they became regular peasants. So that's really, I think, the complexity of studying rural China. You don't really have a very certain identity for anybody in rural China. Even, the local elites during times of social unrest, they really rely on the bandits, give a lot of support to the bandits to help them to maintain their power and even expand their power. So
that was really clear. Thank you. Could I add that there was a religious basis for this too, which is in water margin, for instance,
definitely,
as well as really the other Fengchen Yani or that's the basic story of Fengchen Yani is this sort of similarly a struggle or three kingdoms.
Right. Yeah, I think in traditional China, in the popular literature, so the ordinary people really spoke highly of bandits, right? The local martial arts specialists. It's really like the typical Robin Hood kind of image of a bandit in the Western tradition. So people, in opera, in all kinds of oral literature, people all talk about the bandits like heroes who help the local people to protect themselves from the corrupt officials, from other bandits groups. But that's the really romanticized vision about bandits and this group of local martial arts people. But in reality, it's not really that beautiful, right? So I think banditry to me is really the most important thing for us to understand the rural living environment, because I check hundreds of people's interview confessions. Everybody talks about bandits, and bandits just raid our home every week, every month. So banditry already became one part of their everyday life. So under that kind of pressure of insecurity, so people really need to rely on martial arts and people who can teach martial arts to defend their community from others. Yeah.
So who taught it?
I think a really interesting issue is that in rural China, there are groups of wandering martial arts teachers. So they don't really have a fixed location, and they travel throughout the entire country to preach people to join their martial arts school, and teach people how to fight, and teach people the rituals of like invulnerability. Right,
Invulnerability, yeah.
Yeah, you can protect yourself from all kinds of weapons, and nobody can kill you, nobody can even harm you. So people really believe in this kind of fighting techniques and religious rituals. So they travel around the country to preach and to sell their ideas, and definitely they made a lot of money from this. So I think this issue is not really something new to China. When you look at all the so-called White Lotus rebellions or the Boxer Uprising in the late 19th century, this group of martial art teachers really play a significant role in spreading the message of how to fight, and sort of also encourage people to fight against the government or other local bandits, because they believe they can be protected from some supernatural power.
That brings up a question that I have tried to raise in my work, which is that you have this group of people whose they would be roughly, under the legal system anyway, would be considered bare sticks, right? Right. Sort of an unmarried, unaffiliated men, right? Of which there were a lot. Some say 25% population, and there was also this, and of course those were they were available to be bandits too, right? They could move between these realms, and actors, or professional actors, or itinerant actors, or actors who had left their acting family, right? Who were not legally allowed to do anything but opera. The question is, could they then become these wandering teachers? And what was the status relationship between those two groups, or are they the same group? How can you tell?
I don't really have any direct evidence about the exact relationship between this group of people, but I think overall in late imperial China, you really have the population crisis, right? The population doubled in just a few centuries, and so many people left their original place to work in other places. I think that's why, if you read Philip Kuhn's story about people really afraid of all kinds of sorceries brought up by
Say his last name again. I have read that.
Philip Kuhn.
How do you spell his last name?
Kuhn.
Oh yeah, Kuhn. Yeah.
Yeah, he talked about the militarization in imperial China. I think the population is really a big problem. So you cannot really find a job in your hometown. So you have to learn something else and travel to other parts of China to maintain your survival. So I think that's a fundamental driving force behind people turning to martial arts or becoming actors, in all kinds of Peking opera or other kinds of operas. But I don't really see a clear connection between the actors and the martial art teachers, because for martial art teacher, you still need to learn certain kinds of martial techniques and fighting techniques. But for actors, basically, I think they have very specific tradition in terms of how you learn all the singing techniques and all the performance techniques. Especially in China, they really highlight the idea of discipleship. If you're a great actor and you train a bunch of students, and from very early age, from kids to until they became adults, they start to perform on their own. So I don't really see a necessary connection between the two groups. But overall, the background, the overpopulation and the crisis of food, natural resources, really played a driving force behind this group of people. Yeah, and also I think a lot of religious specialists, became martial arts teacher as well, right? In both the Ming and Qing dynasty, if you become a monk, you need certain kind of certificate from the states, right? But the state only have very limited number of this kind of certificates. That means if you go to a temple and want to become a monk, it may not really turn out to give you the permission to become a monk. So you have to find another job. But you're already out of your hometown and you don't really have a very stable livelihood. So people start to learn something else. And many of them, I think they really travel to the famous mountains of martial arts, like the Wudangshan in Hubei, and also like the Shaolin Temple in Henan province. So they learn the martial arts, and they went to other areas to teach people the martial arts. That became a really promising career for many people.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue, having spent a little bit of time with people trained in Chinese opera, that they can fight, and that they're at 5, they learn bridges and handstands,
right?
And they spend they even use the same vocabulary.
Sure.
So it's but certainly that the defining question is, could they leave? Right.
Exactly.
That, I think, is the question.
Yeah, that's basically two different kinds of careers, although they both of them didn't really have a very stable kind of lifestyle. Yeah, but I don't really have any direct primary sources about this.
No, good, fair enough. So well, that was great. We covered a lot of stuff. Well, let's jump. Well, you talk about Cao Mapi, this particular character. Do you want to tell that story a little bit?
Yeah, I think he's really a famous person in the local area in Poyang, because he is widely recognized as the most powerful bandit leader in the area, who came from a regular poor peasant family. And banditry is just a very regular survival strategy for people in rural China. And when you have no food and your family cannot really support you, you basically have no choice but to become a bandit. And it offers you a lot. You can go and raid other people, and you can even when you have a number of people, you can even fight against the official army to rob them and get new weapons and new supplies. So that guy really became one of the largest bandits in the region in just a few years, actually. And they also allied with other warlords army in the region as well, because in the early 20th century, the warlord period is really the most chaotic period in Chinese history. So the local warlords are fighting against one another. They allied with many of the bandits group as well. And many of the abandoned soldiers, they cannot really find a job, they also join the bandit army. So that's I think really the complex social background in the early 20th century China. And people didn't really have a very stable livelihood. You basically have to find a way to support yourself. And bandits is definitely one of the best choice.
What did his name mean? Cao Mapi?
Cao Mapi, it basically means, he's a very ugly guy.
Okay.
Yeah, but most sources about this guy came from the the government. So I don't really have any idea how the local people view him.
Uh-huh.
Maybe he's not totally a bad guy, and many of the bandits also, share their food and their resources with the local communities. But to the government, definitely a really big threat. But the problem in the early 20th century China is that you don't really have a strong central government. So the government can basically do nothing against this really large group of bandits armies.
Okay, so Yuan Shikai in 1916, was an attempted coup, and then he's out, right? And then you have these warlords are all kind of competing.
Right.
All around China's broken up. How many pieces is China broken up into at this point?
I think you can never count how many pieces.
Okay, uncountable because they're moving, because they're on the move. It's kind of one of the major characteristics of that.
Exactly.
Period.
Like in the Sichuan province, you see, the Sichuan provincial government change the provincial governor almost every year, or even twice a year, because the local warlords are competing with one another, and when you defeat another, you become the new provincial governor. So that's the story going on.
Okay, so and then you jump to 1927, where the KMT comes into power. We'll talk about that in a minute, but maybe you can talk about the sort of nature of these. There are all of these Huidaomen, or what else can we call them?
The local religious voluntary associations.
Yeah, or there's another name. Yeah, or just things that were like what in the earlier era were called White Lotus. It's this wide range, they have been called redemptive societies, particularly like Yiguandao. There's a number of them that sort of were more legitimate, you might say. They grew and still exist. In fact, the Red Crescent, swastika. Red Swastika Society, for instance. There are hundreds of different types, and you focus in on the Big Sword Society and also on the Yellow Crane Society.
Exactly.
And could you talk about their rituals? Like, how did they organize themselves?
Yeah, I think the story really begins with the bandit threat. The bandits just raid the local area frequently, so the local people have no way to protect themselves. So the local elites, the big landlords, went to other areas and invited a martial art teacher to Poyang County and to train the local people how to fight against the bandits. So that's the beginning of the story over there. So you already see a very clear martial art network, right? When people in the case of the Yellow Crane Society, so it's my focus really about the Jiangxi province, but the people actually went to Jiangsu province to invite several martial art teachers. So I don't really know the connection between Jiangxi and Jiangsu, but definitely there's a very clear network of martial art teachers over there. That's why they travel long distance from Jiangxi to Jiangsu. And so the Big Sword Society, basically the same story. And it was very popular in rural Anhui area. And when there was a huge, bandit threat in Poyang County, the people went to Anhui province to invite the martial art teacher, the Big Sword Society teacher, to Poyang to teach people how to fight. So, I use the name. Sometimes I use the name self-defense associations. This group of people in nature about self-defense yourself from the bandit threat. But also, when you adopt a name of a Big Sword or the Yellow Crane, it refers to a very specific martial art school. So the martial art teacher, they train their disciples and they teach a very specific tradition of martial art, techniques. So I don't think they are really organized by, we belong to the same social organization, but it's more about the way we fight, the technique we use. So
are these people around today? Are there styles around, if we use that word, styles?
I don't think they are around. I think in the 1950s, the government, did a very thorough suppression against this group of martial art teachers. And many of them were executed in the 1950s. So I think most of them actually disappeared during the 1950s. But from the 1910s, 1920s, this group of people are everywhere in rural China. It's not only the story you see in Jiangxi province, but also like in Henan, in Jiangsu, and even the Communist Party allied with many of these groups of people in their early stage, because they need to absorb the people who can fight into the Communist Party's army. And that's, a major origin of their, the People Liberation Army we see in the 1940s and 50s. But I think the problem is really we don't have any systematic knowledge about this group of people. And, they have very diverse, tradition of martial arts, and they absorb different martial arts school. They use different, rituals from Taoism, from the popular Buddhism, and the local, cults. So you can never clearly find a pattern of what their ritual is like.
So let me just stop you there, just clarify that. So if you try to say what religion they are, it's not, you can say, oh, look, that's a Taoist thing. Oh, that's a Buddhist thing. Oh, what is that? That's some local ritual thing. Right. We don't actually have the vocabulary yet to say what type of ritual they were doing. So we actually have to describe the individual rituals. So go for it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the difficulty. So you have to, translate everything word by word. And even, you see a lot of martial arts school like the Big Four Society in China. You find them almost in every single province in China, but they just adopt the same name. So the Big Four in this village and in that village belong to totally different martial art tradition. That's totally impossible. So that's really a big difficulty here. You have to study case by case. It's really difficult to make any general argument about this group of people.
Good. So make a specific argument. What you were describing these rituals where they would become possessed. The leadership would become possessed. I think in one case in the Yellow Crane Society, they had 4 leaders that would become possessed by various bodhisattvas, and actually all the initiates would invoke a long list of deities as their supporters, as well as thunder gods and that kind of thing. Is that
exactly? Yeah. So I think many of the gods they use really from Taoism. As you say, from the case of like Fengshen Yanyi.
So from Fengshen Yanyi, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So most of them.
That's what Elizabeth Perry says in a footnote, I think. She says most of these are, well, I guess I don't know what she was reading, but she said most of these people seem to follow Fengshen Yanyi as their sort of organizing principle. And then she goes on to another subject, because that wasn't her subject.
Right.
But
yeah. I think the popular literature really played a significant role. So if you read Joseph Esherick's book on the Boxer Uprising, I think he has a one chapter or half a chapter talking about village opera and the martial arts teacher over there. So basically people learn all the vocabularies and all the names of the deity from opera and other oral literature. So the boundary between martial arts and popular culture is really you cannot really find the boundary. So people take for granted what you learn from the opera to be true. And when they initiate any kind of ritual before fighting against bandits or fighting against others, they really learn this kind of ritual and vocabulary from the popular literature. That sort of shape people's idea about the environment they are living in and also their relationship with the supernatural powers.
So you described some interesting phenomena of bodhisattva, or Guanyin even being invoked. Guanyin, we usually, because Guanyin, I even have a statue here in case I get injured in my practice, because my wife won't listen. If she says I get injured, I have to talk to Guanyin. But it's, we think of Guanyin as, and bodhisattvas in general, as being these benevolent beings. And maybe they were, but their idea of benevolence in some of these groups was a little different. Can you describe that?
Yeah, I think people in these groups, they didn't really have the capability to distinguish different kinds of deities, right? I think, and most people were illiterate. They didn't really read any, formal religious scriptures. They just adopt the name from, popular literature, from opera. So I think to ordinary people, they cannot really tell the difference between, this bodhisattva and another bodhisattva. They just use the name. And what I find really interesting in a case like the Yiguan Dao, other redemptive societies, people just call them Buddha worshippers. They call themselves, I'm a Baifu. They do not really use the name of a particular, deity, a particular god, or a particular name of a religious organization. The basic idea is that I'm worshiping God. It doesn't matter I'm worshiping the Maitreya Buddha or the Guanyin Bodhisattva or a Taoist deity, right? As long as I worship a deity, it's totally enough to protect me and deliver me from evils.
But if I'm a leader and I'm becoming possessed by a particular bodhisattva, doesn't that bodhisattva have I know you weren't there, but wouldn't it have a particular voice? Wouldn't it have particular characteristics? And would they be a different bodhisattva on a different day?
Sure. Yeah, I think it really necessary to distinguish between different groups. The four, religious leaders you mentioned just now is from the Yellow Crane Society or the Big Sword Society. They are more like the local martial arts school. I think to this group of people, they didn't really care much about the characters of each god or each Buddha. But if you, performing the spirit possession ritual in a redemptive society, it's really something means a lot to the people over there. So when you use like spirit writing or spirit possession, they will call a very specific god. If you are praying for a son, they will call the name of the god related to fertility, right? But if you are really praying for medicine, praying for protection from bandits, they will call other kinds of deities. That really means a lot in redemptive society or in the pure religious organizations. But in the case of the martial schools, I think they just put almost every deity they can find together, and they didn't really care which god they are calling for.
I've seen some evidence reading about earlier eras that this is true too. It's one of the puzzles I found in looking at late 1700s, 1800s, whatever, these groups, right? These groups which were more, sometimes called heterodox cults or something.
Or the evil cults.
Yeah, evil cults, basically. They in confession, right? They have these forced confessions where then they're executed, like in the baojiao.
Right.
And they all say kind of the same thing. They all say they
like the end of the world or something.
Well, it's what's her name? Wusheng Mu.
Wusheng Laomu, the eternal mother. Oh,
yeah, but it really means not born mother, right? Or something like that, literally. Or beyond birth or something. And they mention her, often, and they also mention, which is weird because I haven't found her in Taoism or Fengshen Yani. Where is she? And then you also have this the third Buddha, like Sanfo, like
right, the Sakyamuni, the lamp lighting Buddha, and the Maitreya Buddha.
Supposedly, right? But they just always say third Buddha. Like in the confessions, they always say third Buddha, and I think was that just so that they could say they were all part of White Lotus, or maybe they were confessing to lots of different deities, or maybe it occurred to me that third Buddha sounds a lot like third prince, that they could be talking about Naja.
Right.
And so I was just like, this is a weird pattern. Like, why be generic? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's why in both the Ming and Qing government, they label these people as the White Lotus, right? Because they basically believe in the same genealogy of theological teachings, like the Wusheng Laomu or the three Buddhas. So I think, all these figures appear in early Taoism or Buddhism in China, But I think what's really interesting in after the Yuan dynasty is that, the Wusheng Laomu in the beginning is more about, in the very early Taoism or the popular literature in China is about the Kunlun Laomu or something, who the female deity who created.
Qigong Mu.
Right,
Yeah.
Xiwangmu, and also even trace back to the Nuwa, who made people and who made the earth. So, but this figure didn't really play a very important role in Taoism or Buddhism later in the official scriptures. But they did appear after the Yuan dynasty, and in both the Ming and Qing dynasty, they appear in all the so-called White Lotus groups, and they are especially related to the idea of the millenarianism, the end of the world is coming. So, people, the society we are living in is a morally degenerated society. So the God is going to punish people, and if you still commit to evil deeds, you'll be totally wiped out from earth, right? So that's why the three Buddhas or the Wusheng Laomu came to earth to save the people. So they basically played like the role of Messiah. They came down to earth to save these people who believe in their power and who are doing moral things in the society. So I have no idea, how this certain kinds of deity, became so popular in the last 3 or 4 centuries. But I think they became the central figure in almost every redemptive society we see in the 20th century.
Could I could psychoanalyze it a little and say that there's guilt. There's this way in which feeling guilty about, I don't know, having survived, maybe survivor guilt, something like that, that then turns into now I have to save the world, and and I have to. It's my conduct, it's the way I behave, and if you behave like me, we can save the world together. Everybody else, is lost.
Yeah, I think in both the Ming and Qing dynasty, you see a lot of the emergence of a very specific religious genre is called the baojiao, the precious volumes.
Yeah, so, precious scrolls or precious volumes.
Yeah. So a lot of this baojiao literature really talking about what the end of the world will be like. So certain gods will come from heaven to destroy everything, and how the Maitreya Buddha, especially also called the future Buddha, will deliver the good people from this earth to the next world. So in the last 2 to 3 centuries, you see the the really prosperity of this kind of literature. It became really popular and became the theme of many operas or popular literature in almost everywhere in China. So I think
that's interesting. Have you looked at specifically at operas on that subject? Because that none of that stuff's been translated. I've read David Obermeyer's really difficult book in English, I have to say.
Exactly.
On the precious scrolls, and I what else would I say about them? Yes, this idea that they're really widespread. In some ways, they pioneer a kind of easier, the modern Chinese, simpler Chinese. They're very interesting texts to study.
Yeah, many of them were more like a vernacular Chinese.
Yeah.
So people with very limited education were able to read this kind of scripture, unlike the highly educated, people, for the official religious text, it's totally undigestible to the local people. Right. So this kind of baojiao literature really became popular. But the problem is, even for Chinese scholars, we know very little about this very specific genre. Right. And to most people, when we talk about Chinese religion, we mean Taoism and Buddhism, and this kind of popular literature, popular religion, scholar didn't really care much, But definitely, I think it's becoming more and more popular among scholars right now. But I think we still need to study a lot about them.
Well, because it's what most people are doing, right? And if we're getting at the subject, which is one of the subjects I've been trying to track down, right? Where did martial arts come from? It seems pretty important because a lot of these groups were combining these texts with some kind of martial art.
Exactly. I think, Catherine Alexander's is writing about very specific types of baojiao literature, right?
Yeah, this is going to be a future interview. Hopefully, she'll do it. We have a mutual friend, for people who don't know that. That's how we met. Who is studying this specifically, and so we'll get back to that. But I'm glad that we could talk about it a little bit.
Sure.
It's so what happened? So in 1927, the KMT gets stronger. Is that good sense? Between this sort of period between 1927 and 1931, the KMT really grows in strength. From the martial arts point of view, two major things happen in that period. 1927, you get the blockbuster film Red Lotus Temple, which is the biggest hit in China, and everybody sees this movie. It's Xiang Kai-ren's who wrote the screenplay, and he becomes the voice for an alternate way of seeing what martial arts are. And then in 1931, kung fu movies, wuxia is banned in China.
Right.
And women in the KMT, the nationalists, had been promoting male and female martial arts since, sort of building on the Jingwu, the pure martial movement from the early 20th century, earlier in the 20th century. And then they banned women's martial arts in 31. What was going on with these societies? Like, what's the connection between what was going on in Poyang and this bigger picture?
Yeah, I think Rebecca Nettlestuff's book is really about this period, about the nationalist government's understanding of religion and modernity, right? So I think for the nationalist government in the in the 20s and 30s, their mission was really to build a modern China, a modern industrialized Chinese society. And one of the major ideological difficulties they were encountering during that period is all kinds of religion, including martial arts schools, right? To them, if you believe in certain kinds of elite martial arts, right, like something we talk about in the kung fu movies, this urban center and highly educated people, who participate in this kind of martial art. I don't think they really worry about this kind of martial arts. But what they really worry, in my case, is the kind of combination of local religion and local martial arts practice. To them, it's totally superstitious and totally
superstitious. Yeah.
Right. You're right. The mission, it's against the idea of being modern, right? To them, China was already left behind, and China really need to modernize itself and become a, secularized country. But martial arts and local deities, they were really the remnant of the old society. So the nationalist government really did a lot of things to destroy all this kind of superstitious elements. So I think the idea is basically the same as the Communist Party in the 1950s. So they label everything at a local level. It doesn't matter it's religion or it's martial arts. Everything, it's just superstitious. And what we really wanted is a modern economy, modern industry, and modern education about science, technology. So this kind of modernist agenda, I think, that's the mentality of the nationalist government during that period. But the interesting thing is that, the power of the nationalist government is very limited. And you say maybe like in Jiangsu, where Nanjing was the capital city of the nationalist government. In Jiangsu, there might be a very thorough suppression against all this kind of local religion and martial arts practices. But outside Jiangsu, I think the power of the suppression is very limited. In the case of Jiangxi province, in my case in Poyang County, the people, when they recall about what's going on in the 20s, in the 30s, they have no idea about there was official ban against.
They didn't even know.
Right, they didn't even know, and the local government officials, they didn't intervene at all, right? Yeah. Because they need the local people to defend themselves against bandits, and the bandits also help. The local martial arts school also help. To maintain the stability of the big families, the local elites, right? And even many of the local officials rely on the power of the local martial arts schools. So I think at a local level, it's a totally different story.
Um, so, okay, so there's this thing that I've come across several times, and I wanted to dig in just a little bit, because you mentioned this sort of urban martial arts phenomenon, right? Which is like Tai Chi, Baguazhang,
Right.
Qi, Baji Chuan, there maybe White Crane, maybe this sort of list of things that were sort of urbanized, or in the South it would be Wing Chun and Choi Li Foot, right? And that these, I would argue that these were, you could say, gentrified in some way, or that they were cleaned up maybe toward the end of the Qing dynasty, maybe after the Boxer, certainly more after the Boxer Uprising, and that they became more acceptable. They worked, in fact, to become more acceptable. But the rest of the country had also had all their martial arts, and they, by privilege of being where they were lower status in some sense, and these are still referred to in by the government, the Chinese government now, as like, I don't know, traditional martial arts and folk martial arts. They have some very Mijian, Mijian, or what's the word for it? But they actually, yeah, they have like a word for like these kind of lesser, more folky martial arts that might even still, we have discovered since the 90s, still have some religious elements in them, perhaps. Maybe some of that survived a little tiny bit.
I think different martial arts schools just serve for different purposes, right? Many of the elite-based urban martial arts schools, they are more for the purpose of self-cultivation, right? It's not only about fighting, but more about like meditation, or even how to cultivate your own morality, that kind of agenda. But I think for the Minjiang, the rural martial arts school, in most cases, they serve for very practical reasons. People really need to learn how to fight, to protect themselves from bandits, to resist the government from taxation, conscription. So I think to the government, the rural practice is really something, disturbing the local stability from the government's perspective. But for the urban one,
so the religious elements of the martial arts went through this gentrification as well, right? Not just the style, but their religion that they were practicing became more self-cultivation, which happened to all religion in the urban areas, in fact.
Exactly.
And then you have this much more outrageous religion. We call it outrageous rather than superstitious. I don't know, rough. Scholars have not settled on what to call it, obviously, because they don't want derogatory terms. And as you said, like, there are elements of it that are difficult to comprehend because they were illiterate and they just seem to be drawing on
different traditions.
Or something they knew, and we don't know how they knew it, right?
Exactly. They try to absorb everything they heard from, and try to put everything together. So it's not really a very, organized religious tradition, unlike you see the urban elite-based Buddhist groups. You cling to a very specific Buddhist tradition, but in rural China, everything is put together. It's really difficult to distinguish between this one and another one.
Let's talk about some other weird stuff you came across. Flower Basket Society.
Right. I don't really have many, a lot of information about this. So it's referring to a, female martial arts school, and people believe in that by carrying a basket, when you defend yourself from bandits, the bandit cannot harm you, cannot kill you. So it's pretty similar to what called the Red Lanterns, the Hongdeng Huidaomen Jiao in the Boxer Uprising, right? It's not only this group of male martial arts school, male invulnerability rituals, but also there's a women version of it as well. So I don't really have a lot of information about this, but I think martial art in that sense is not only a male thing, but also both genders.
So they had their baskets were a magical weapon.
Yeah.
The other thing, Paul Cohen's book, there's lots of other people who have talked about this, but he laid it out pretty clearly. There's this whole thing about menstrual blood and showing the vagina or as a way to take away the enemy's power.
Exactly.
Perhaps the opposite was there was some way of, I think, this is actually a worldwide phenomenon.
Exactly. In both the rituals I see in the big sword society and also yellow crane society, that women were believed to be dirty. So when you learn the rituals, when you join the yellow crane or the big sword, you basically cannot go home and have sex with your wife. If you do it basically means you cannot learn nothing from this particular martial arts school. And women were just believed to be a very negative thing to them. But at the local level, I think the picture of this kind of martial art practice is really complicated. So I don't know how they interpret this group of women's participation in the in martial arts. I think one reason is that in the male part, like the big sword society, it's only about the males, the men in the society. How about women? When the men absent from home and when the bandits came, what can women do in that situation? So the women definitely need to learn something else as well. But it's definitely to totally separate, martial arts school. So it cannot be mixed up, cannot be used together. And when you perform the ritual of the yellow crane or the big sword, and if you add any female element into that, it basically means it becomes totally invalid. Yeah, I think
their goal was to project fear.
Yeah, definitely. But people literally believe in the invulnerability rituals.
Talk about that a little bit.
I think in many cases, before introducing the invulnerability rituals into the local society, people can never organize themselves to fight against bandits. Or even the government, they try to organize militia to defend themselves from the bandits. It didn't really work out because people were so afraid of the bandits and they didn't really want to fight. But I found really interesting is that when the martial art teacher came to Poyang, came to organize the martial arts schools, people really joined the martial arts school bravely and began to fight against the bandits, or even killed a lot of local bandits, including like the Cao Mapi, the very famous bandits over there. So that's definitely a really important psychological factor, right? When you believe you are totally equipped with the supernatural power to protect yourself. And also, I think the martial arts school teachers did not only introduce them the invulnerability ritual, but also fighting techniques. How you can use different weapons and how to protect yourself, and that definitely makes the people more capable in terms of fighting. So I do not really see any clear description how this kind of ritual give people more confidence and give people the encouragement. But the result is that people start to defend themselves more voluntarily. And even more, progressively, they start to attack the bandits, not only to defend them negatively.
In theater, I've done a lot of thinking about this question of invulnerability. Meir Shahar actually has written several interesting essays on it. And again, it's a region-wide thing. It even has some precedence worldwide as a phenomenon. And it seems it was quite common in earlier times as well, and that it's very common in theater. And one of the reasons it's common in theater is because because it's funny. If
Uh-huh.
if I'm having vulnerability skills and we go to fight, I already won. It doesn't. You can do anything you want. You can,
Right.
you can punch me in the face and I can go ha ha ha.
Uh-huh.
Or I can like appear to die and then no, I'm not dead.
Right, right.
It makes for great theater. And so I think when we look at the theater tradition, you see the invulnerability is, at least in some way, sometimes
Uh-huh.
in subtle ways, sometimes in much more explicit ways, is there all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, but I think in the case of China, people didn't really start to pay attention to the invulnerability rituals until all the White Lotus rebellions and the Boxer uprisings.
Yeah.
When the practice of invulnerability is really widespread in China, that's when people start to look at that social phenomena. But I think the problem is really we cannot understand the exact mentality of the people who believe in the invulnerability ritual. To us, it's ridiculous, and to us, it means nothing. But to the local people, that really means everything to them. So I find really one interesting case in Poyang County. One young man recalled that when people told him about the invulnerability ritual, he was really excited about that because he believed when I learn the ritual, I can go to the battleground to fight against the Japanese people, and I'll be able to kill thousands of Japanese, and then I'll become a general, become a leader in the military, so I can become rich and powerful. So then people really believe in the in the effect of the invulnerability rituals. But another big difficulty for them is that once they see the people who claim to be protected by the invulnerability ritual dead, they will start to doubt about the ritual instantly. So as in many cases, when the CCPs or the Communist Party army clash with the local martial arts people, and when the army start to shout at them, the people run away instantly because they no longer believe in the ritual anymore in just a second.
Yeah, interesting problem, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
The So automatic weapons, obviously, bandits, everybody had access to weapons during this period, or was
Right.
trying to get access to superior weapons. But what
Uh-huh.
about magical weapons? Did you encounter any conversations other than the baskets?
Magical weapon, I did not really see any other types of magic weapons. It's more like the traditional Chinese weapon, like spear, sword, this kind of thing. But I found really something interesting is about people's rejection about the modern weapons and the automatic weapons. To many, I didn't really send you that chapter 5 of my dissertation.
Oh, I can't wait to read it.
I talk about even many redemptive societies in Republican China, they absorb a lot of local militias, local self-defense people into their organization. So one of their belief is that if you want to revive morality and make the society better, you need to reject all modern technology. And the
Wow.
answer to modern technology is the traditional Chinese martial arts, especially the invulnerability rituals. So I think that's a really interesting phenomenon during that period. People had a very clear idea about the West and the East. So the West is corruptive. You rely on modern science, technology, all the kind of machines. But we Eastern people, we believe in meditation, we believe in religion, we believe in martial arts. That's something much better than the so-called Western modernity.
Do you think that idea was 50 or 60 years old at that time, or do you think that was a direct reaction to what they were encountering at the time?
I think it's something very natural, actually. For Chinese intellectuals like Liang Qichao, Yan Fu, the most famous intellectual in the late Qing period, during the late 19th century, when China was, defeated by the British, by the French multiple times, people start to say, if you want to revive China, make China better, you need to learn from the West, right? You need to adopt modern education, modern science, technology, that kind of thing. But when we get to the early Republican period, many Chinese intellectuals start to doubt about the value of modern Western, technology. You rely too much on science, and if you rely too much on technology, we're no longer human anymore.
We're no longer human.
Yeah,
we become ghosts.
We become like a machine, right?
Machine. Become machines. Oh, yeah.
It's pretty much like the tension between in Europe, like the Enlightenment periods, intellectuals, and the Romanticism period, right? If you rely too much on reason, on science, society will be very problematic. The society will be sick. So to the many Chinese intellectuals in the early 20th century, basically the same thing. So it's okay to study science and technology, but if you totally rely on science and technology, if you lose what you call the Chinese-ness, or you lose the traditional Eastern values, you still should honor Buddhism, Taoism, and all the religious value, because that is what teach us to be a human, right? So this kind of mentality and ideology are really embedded in many martial arts schools and redemptive societies.
I'm just going to throw this out here because it's entertaining. My first trip to China in '96, I was kung fu guy. I've been practicing martial arts since I was a little kid. So I would go into parks. This was before '96. There weren't very many cars at all, right?
Right.
So I traveled all over the place, and I would just find a park at 6 a.m. and start practicing. And the reception I got from people, no matter everywhere in China, was incredibly warm, and it was also really specific. They would come up and they would say what seemed to me like, "Oh, you're human." It wasn't. They didn't say that directly, but it was that kind of like, "You've surprised us. You're human," kind of reaction. And then they would say, "So how are we related?" And they would try to figure out how their lineage or someone in the park's lineage was related to me. And inevitably, they would find someone in the park who had some distant relationship to me and my martial arts lineages. And I thought, wow, that's a fantastic phenomenon. And so, anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in there because I think you nailed it. I think that was how they saw it.
Right, especially when people see a Western man practicing Chinese martial arts, I think even today, when you go to China, especially some smaller places, not necessarily like in Beijing and Shanghai, but smaller places, when you do martial arts as a foreigner, people will be really surprised about that. And I think for Chinese people, they really have the very clear divide between what we call the West and what we call the East. The East are meant to be more traditional, more religious, and but to the West, it's always about technology, about cars, about modern weapons, that kind of impression. So I think many of the redemptive society and martial arts schools really play that kind of rhetoric in the 1930s and 40s. I think it's really a good advertisement to some degree. Well, we are Chinese, so we practice traditional Chinese martial arts, and we cannot become totally Westernized. But at the same time, I think many people really believe in that, modern technology lead to the degeneration of morality. And if you want to make a society a better place, you have to adopt the traditional, religious teachings or the martial arts to improve to self-cultivate.
So I've made an argument, which I don't know what you think of it, because I don't think you had a chance to read my latest book. But what I argue is that there was what I call the YMCA consensus. So the YMCA, well, the YMCA because you're here. So the YMCA, was a very powerful, a Western redemptive society, right? That built hospitals and schools all over China. And there were many other, it wasn't just the YMCA, it was many other Christian groups. But those people who came up through those schools became the new leadership of the KMT. Something like 30% went to Christian schools, something like that. But when I talk about the YMCA consensus, I'm really talking about the idea among intellectuals and practitioners in religion and martial arts and theater that these things had to be separate. So theater had to become essentially a political entity, and religion had to become redemptive. It had to have all these elements of Protestant Christianity, and martial arts had to be separated. It had to be just this, but it still maintained a type of religiosity, right? It separated out a lot of what we call this rougher type of religion, and its theatricality became, just plain, right?
Sure.
Less character, right? Something like that. Like they're cutting way back on the theatricality if they could, but they kept this religiosity about what I would call the YMCA value system, which seems to have fit really well with Chinese culture, which is that idea that it makes you a better person. The word Gong Fu itself means that, right? And so anyway, that's my kind of framing, because I think very often religious people are like, oh, we talk about religion, like Neto Step, that's all she talks about. Right. She doesn't talk about theater ever. She doesn't talk about martial arts ever. But I'm like, oh, all these people that she's talking about also were dealing with theater, and if you study the individuals, right? So that's a point I like to make. But
I think many people are sort of brainwashed by the secularist idea that the separation between religion and martial arts, between religion and government, between theater and religion. So everything should be separated, and everything has its own privacy and its own space. But in China or in anywhere, people do not really make that kind of distinction in real life, right? Religion and martial arts, they are always together. Religion and the theater, they are always together. So, but I think they really represent the Chinese government's dream to sort of separate everything and make sure politics only about politics and religion is only about religion. But it's just a dream. I think both the Chinese government and the communist government today, they are trying to do that, but it will never be successful.
Yeah, really interesting comment. What about this group, the Yue Fei Society? What were they about?
I think it's more like a private army. So when you have a very big family, the big landlords, they want to protect themselves, so they build their own militia. They recruit the poor people from the society, and also like invite the martial art teacher from the outside to train these people. So that's I think it's a very typical private army of a very specific family. So when you got the resources, when you got the money, so you can recruit people to become your private militia. But the interesting story is that what happened only to the Republican period in China is that the government really tried to open up elections, make the government position available to the ordinary people. So when the local elites, local politicians competed with one another for the power for elections, they start to fight against one another violently.
Yes. Democracy did not work because they were already organized into groups.
Exactly.
They were armed.
So many of this group, originally they were for the purpose of defending the community against bandits, later became the private army of many of the local elites. Or they just recruit certain people from the martial arts school to fight for them, and even to kill your opponent in the political election. So that became really, really bloody and violent in the case of Poyang. These people came to Poyang, the martial art teacher, originally to train the people to fight against bandits and maintain stability in the local society. But once when they got involved in the local politics, they start to fight and kill each other within the local community. So I think that's really like the double side of the martial arts in local China. It could be a thing to make sure the environment is safe, our livelihood maintained and protected. But on the other hand, it could be also a very, destabilizing factor in the society as well, because you got the technique to fight and you got the people to fight as well.
So you describe what is it called? Xie duo, right? The sort of tit for tat feuding as a ongoing
Right.
competition, often over resources like water.
Right.
And that these were battles. You describe them, having an ancestral base, right? So people
Exactly.
were fighting specifically for their ancestors and actually making offerings to their ancestors and then going off to fight. But these
Right.
maybe were smaller scale fights, right? Where like, oh, a couple people died, okay, let's retreat, and then but there were
Yeah,
blood
in most
feuds.
cases, but it really depends on the region. Sometimes there are really large scale feuding between two lineages. But in most cases, it's not that big because in most cases, government tries not to intervene in the lineage conflicts because it's really difficult for the government to decide. So, if you kill too many people in just one feuding, it becomes really problematic.
But that's a really important point, right? That the government for hundreds of years tried to stay out of these fights.
Exactly. Because you can never make the correct judgment about lineage conflicts, right? It's not like criminal activities. You can make, punish the criminal, but in terms of lineage conflict, you can you cannot really blame both sides, right? And the government become really awkward position in this kind of lineage conflicts. So government try not to intervene, so the people have to seek another channel to resolve all the conflict. So one of the really important channel is to learn martial arts and train your own people to fight, so you can defeat the other lineage.
Um, well, I've seen that kung fu movie a lot of times. I've seen that movie. It's a plot. It's a movie plot, right? I mean,
Uh-huh.
in reality, that's been used as a movie plot. Do you? I know. This doesn't seem. This is not a normal academic question, but what's the best from a historian's point of view? What's
Uh-huh.
the best movie? You weren't ready for
Wow,
that one.
that's yeah, it's a really difficult question. But I don't know if you say like Chinese movie or
Yeah, I meant like wuxia, kung fu movies. I know a lot of people who are going to listen to this watch kung fu movies, and a lot people
right.
really often. I don't know why if they don't ask you this, they often ask me,
Uh-huh.
can I just learn about this from a movie? Like, and I usually say no, but
Uh-huh.
you know, some movies do have interesting details. If you give the right setup, you can learn something. So that's why I asked.
Right, yeah. I have no idea which one I could call the best.
Do you have a favorite anyway?
Not necessarily, because I think when we talk about kung fu movies, especially in the last few decades, the idea of martial arts in China now is really associated with the idea of nation state, right? It's a
Yes.
reputation of the Chinese spirit, and Chinese people, we need to learn the Chinese martial arts. So you see a lot of movie about the Republican period martial art teachers, right, who are able to defeat the Japanese, really to promote the idea of national salvation, national
Those are terrible
pride.
movies, aren't they?
Yeah, I really hate that kind of idea. You
Good,
call
good.
the martial arts the essence of Chinese culture.
Hmm.
I feel martial arts is for the purpose of martial art. You don't have to relate directly to the idea of a nation or being Chinese. So I don't know. I would probably prefer more like the more historical base, like wuxia literature. If you say like Jin Yong, that kind of Chinese martial art novels really builds upon very specific time period, like the late Yuan dynasty or the
Hmm.
early Ming dynasty. So, different political forces try to fight against one another. And also you see, the romance between different heroes and different martial arts specialists. So that gives me more like a human kind of feeling. But when you relate martial art to nationalism, I
Hmm.
really hate that kind of,
All right. So a push for the older stuff. And Good enough. That was a great answer. We'll leave it there. But if you think of something you want to put it, want to give it to me later, I can put it in the notes. We have plenty of space for. I'll write notes up later. Let's see. I wanted to ask you about. What was it? It's not on any of my notes anymore. I got past my notes. Well, that's good.
I think he also talks about like did martial art really disappear after the Communist Party came to power or something like that?
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about that. Yeah. I did ask you that particular question about. So I think there's a lot of. You already talked about that a little bit. I mean, that there were thousands of these people who were just executed, and I think people who maybe went to China in the 90s or in the last 20 years, Westerners who went to learn martial arts, have occasionally they get someone who has a horror story to tell and will tell it. But most of the time they get answers from people like, oh, what was your life like? Especially if they're talking to older people. They'll be like, oh, it wasn't so bad, or it didn't happen to me, and this kind of thing. And so I don't know. Do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, I think, what the government really worried about is about a very specific organization. It's not really about the individual. So if you practice certain kinds of martial art individually and you don't really join any clear organizational affiliation, I think it's totally okay. But the government really worry about collective actions, right? When a lot of people gather together under the name of a martial arts school or under the name of a religious organization, the government really started to worry about the situation. So to arrest the people, get involved in, even execute a number of them to threaten others. So I think that's what really happened in the 1950s when the government will worry about the potential counter-revolutionaries, who really want to restore the nationalist government on the mainland and try to, become the spies of the nationalist party. So they arrested many of the local martial arts schools. But most people are really related to a very clear organization, a very clear martial arts organization, religious organization. But I think for the individuals, if you only practice martial art for your self-cultivation only at home, instead of creating an open space, a public space to show other people, that's totally fine. And I think the irony for the Chinese people is that you see in the 1980s and 1990s the idea of the Qigong, right, and also the revival of many martial arts movies and martial arts literature, because to the Chinese government, Chinese people, you really need something like a national symbol, right? When after a few decades of sort of try to destroy almost everything you can call Chinese religion, Confucian studies, and the government really needs something to rebuild their national identity. And
so let me just slow you down. Just say that again. So there's this period before the Cultural Revolution where they're actually targeting anyone who has a group or religious function. Just cut them out, stop them cold.
Exactly.
But so what survived was people who had already cleaned up their act earlier, who had already cleaned that stuff out from an earlier era.
Right. Or people who have no organizational affiliation at all.
But that wouldn't be traditional, right? Because But so and then the Cultural Revolution happens and it's chaos. People have trouble talking about this period because, were you the target or were you the targeter? But everything that you could call traditional was attacked.
Right.
And then there's this sense of, can we rebuild?
Exactly.
That's what you were just talking about.
Especially in the 80s and 90s, after the Cultural Revolution, after you destroy everything you can call Chinese, so who we are and why we are Chinese, what is a cultural bond between each Chinese people. Wow. So that's the period when the Qigong really became popular, and many other martial art practice as well, right? That's the Tai Chi as well. So, it's more like a national symbol and to promote the idea that we are Chinese and we are rebuilding the traditional culture, something like that. So I think that's my parents' generation or the people who are slightly older than me, the 1980s and early 1990s when many people start to watch kung fu movies and start to read the kung fu literature during that period. But for the younger generation, who are younger than me, people almost lost their interest in martial arts totally, right? And so I think, the 1980s and 1990s really is the period when everything Chinese revived, and martial arts really one important element in that category. But what really changed everything is because of the Falungong. It belongs to one of the Qigong tradition, and it has a very clear religious and even millenarian agenda as well.
Yeah. So
right.
Falun Gong at a millenarian tradition, and also attacked the government in very subtle ways.
Exactly. So the government totally suppressed Falun Gong nationwide in China because Falun Gong during that period has millions of followers, right? So the Falun Gong incident really became a turning point when the government no longer talks about Qigong, no longer talks about martial arts, no longer talking about the national spirit, something like that.
We should mention David Palmer's book, Qigong Fever, is really a phenomenal book. I'll put that up on the screen for people. I was in China in 2001 and in Sichuan area and traveling around with, I just made friends with people and visited temples all over the place. And occasionally, they were uncomfortable talking about Qigong at all. And they were, and a couple times that Falun Gong was mentioned by me or someone else, they were like,
exactly. Yeah, that's the most sensitive period. I think the suppression came about in 1999, right?
Yes.
Yeah, just 2 years after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, during that period, I think, I was in elementary school at that time, but, the TV...
You're a baby!
Yeah, but the TV basically shut down almost anything else. It's only about why Falun Gong is evil and what kind of thing Falun Gong did to the ordinary people. So I still have a very vivid impression, memory about what the government says about the Falun Gong. I think that really is a turning point that the government no longer mentions any martial arts or anything we call the Chinese spirit. So I think that's the turning point in terms of the golden age of martial arts practice in the 20th century. And then when it came to the younger generation, they start to forget about all this kind of traditions.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, of course, that's happened in the West too. But I have a there's been a very Chinese martial arts was preeminent for a period, and then has become more and more older people, my generation, Gen X, who are interested in my generation was all about lifestyle and this kind of commitment to authenticity, authentic milieus, authentic communities, and as a counter to our previous era, which was counterculture, right? The hippies and the moral majority were this counterculture thing, and then we became like, can we create an authentic subculture? And so Chinese martial arts fit really well into that. But now we're in this atomized culture, and there's much less interest in it. I don't know what will change, if it will change. But I was at a Taoist conference in LA just this summer, and there was about half the people were from mainland China, and I had this great conversation with a woman who was a designer and an artist as well as a scholar, and it raised something that I was sort of aware of but hadn't really thought about, which was that she said about, it's something like a half or a third of all university students are required to take Tai Chi in college, and that part of that is an indoctrination about what it is. So there's like a history philosophy, which is probably almost entirely bogus from my point of view, but that they have to learn. Did you have to learn this?
Yeah, I had to learn it when I was a college student, but but I think the problem is to them Tai Chi is only part of the PE class. Right, it does not talk about any of the history of Tai Chi or the religious element in Tai Chi.
Well, yeah, it's already been reframed as a physical education class.
Right, it's totally about the secular version of the, and I think it's totally different from the original, Tai Chi practice. But I think, to me, the purpose of that is really about promoting the idea of Chinese sports, right? When we talk about sports, we will talk about physical education. Everything's about the West. But now, when you introduce Tai Chi, it really gives you the sense that we Chinese also has something we can compete with the West, the Olympic spirits, right? This is the more kind of Chinese spirit, physical education. But I think it only lasted for a few years because I was really curious about this issue. So I talked to many students who came to the United States in the past few years. Did you take a Tai Chi class when you were a college student in China? Most people said no. So I have no idea the scale of that kind of Tai Chi practice. How many students will require for that class.
So the requirement may have changed. What about the uniformity of what gets taught in terms of the physical part and the description of what it is?
It basically has no description about what it is.
Oh, you didn't, in the version you got, there was no description.
Yeah, so the teacher only teach you how to do it, how to perform it. That's all. And I think for the reception part, for the students, it's really about you need to learn this and pass the exam and get your degree. We never talk about, what we can learn from this. Is this something about the Taoist practice or has anything to do with Chinese culture? We never have that kind of feeling. So I don't know. I think for the government, when you have a very deep propaganda behind any kind of educational training, the effect of that is always very counterproductive. So the student really hate that kind of idea. The student really want to play soccer, tennis for a physical education class, but when you teach Tai Chi, you need to stay there for half an hour basically doing nothing. The student really hated that. I think it's super counterproductive.
Funny, very funny. What could you say something about and we can always cut this if it gets a little out of hand, if you don't like how it comes out. But China and the United States are in a kind of a conflict that seems to have been escalating lately. And Chinese students in the United States are a pawn in this game, a pawn from both points of view. Do you want to comment on that? What's it like doing scholarship? What's the significance of that?
Yeah, I think it's really significant. And doing scholarship on China, it's getting more and more difficult. So one thing, a determinant factor is that for us as historians, if you go back to China to visit the archives, and when you want to see some document, it's becoming more and more impossible. And especially if you want to see something after 1949, it basically is impossible for you to see anything after 49. So it's really a big problem for many scholars. So I think I was really lucky to get a lot of stuff about, from the public security system. That's the most sensitive, bureau in China right now. And also, I think the Chinese government is trying to intervene in academic freedom overseas as well. So you see the Chinese government send a lot of warning to the academic publishers, saying that you cannot really publish any articles about the Chinese leaders, about Taiwan, about Tibet, about Xinjiang, and about religion as well. So that really happened a lot. I think the direct consequence is not really about the publisher stop publishing anything on China. It's about a psychological warning to the scholars who work on China. When you publish something, you have to think ahead and self-censor the content of your writing before you're really going to publish it. So I think that's a really negative thing to scholarship on China right now. And also, I think, especially after Xi Jinping came to power in the last 5 or 6 years, Chinese students came, in the United States are becoming more and more patriotic, literally. So, when I came to the United States in 2012, I think during that period, we were pretty free to talk about anything about China in the classroom. But right now, when you teach about the history of the Communist Party, when you talk about the Cultural Revolution, some Chinese students will stand up and tell you, you should not say this in the classroom, even in the United States. That happened a lot, not only in the United States, in Canada, in Australia as well. So, to me, it's really a big headache. When you try to teach a Chinese history class, you need to think ahead, how the Chinese student will respond to your teaching. Even if you have a lot of evidence to support your claim, the student may just disagree with you. Even something super unpleasant will happen during the classroom. To me, that's the most direct consequence of the conflict between the two countries. So academic freedom in the United States is really, really going down because of the Chinese government's intervening in this story.
That's a whole nother conversation. I
Exactly.
really like the answer you gave, and I would really, I'm not sure if, like this talk could get really long if we go into it. I have a story, I have my own story that is really parallels it in a way. I was teaching, I took this gig, because I was teaching martial arts in the school, and my whole thing is teaching Chinese martial arts as a form of theater, with music and stuff, and the idea that there was you needed a gong and a drum to defend a village. And so I was teaching kids, and I got this gig. It was 1 block from my house, so it was really hard to turn it down. And it was like 5 days a week. I mean, they had me there doing all kinds of stuff. And besides teaching martial arts, they had me like for, I don't know, half an hour or something, hanging out with the kids, meeting parents when they came to pick them up. It was an after-school program. And so I, and maybe help them study a little, but it was mostly, but then this was kindergarten to, this was elementary school, so kindergarten to 5th grade. And there was 2 girls. One was 9 and the other was 5. And I had met their grandmother, in fact, and they who was really sweet. And anyway, I can't remember what the conflict was in the class. Something happened. It didn't seem like a very big deal, but the 5-year-old stood up on a chair, and she got into an attention position, and she said, "My grandfather was a Red Army general," and then gave this short little speech, and her sister just turned red. I mean, she was so embarrassed, anyway, I was just like, "Whoa, this is amazing! What's going on?" But I think, there's some indoctrination is a powerful tool.
Definitely. From my observation, the Chinese students here in the United States are getting just more and more buying into the Chinese government's rhetoric and narrative of history. So I think that's really something really problematic, right? As my
Mhm.
observation, like, on campus, there's the so-called Chinese Scholars and Student Association. It used to be a non-governmental organization run by the students themselves, but
Mhm.
now it's getting more and more support from the Chinese embassy, Chinese government here. So it's basically like a spying organization here, report any suspicious students' activity to the government, something like that.
Yes.
So it's really an unpleasant experience here working on China. And especially for historians, we are really worried about our future careers. If you go to China, you can find nothing over there. You are not allowed to go to the village to interview the people there. So what can you write about? And that's really a big trouble. Something I really worry about.
What do you see in your future? Are you do you plan to stay in the United States
Yeah,
permanently?
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Because my wife is a American citizen, so she's working here, living here.
Yay.
I'll basically stay here. Yeah, and because of my topic, I work on like martial arts, religion, and local governance, that kind of stuff. I cannot go back to China and write about that. Uh-huh.
Uh,
So I'm just looking for a job here.
Um, well, thank you for doing that work. I mean, I really want to
Uh-huh.
just say how much I appreciate what you're interested in and that you're putting it out there.
It's
I,
really work.
a lot of people are going to really appreciate that you've been doing this work. I think in my
Thank you for
world,
that.
in my world, and it's just been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Um,
Me too. Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation.
well, I hopefully when your book comes out, I hope it's going to be published. First of all,
Uh-huh.
is it? Oops. Is there anything else you'd like to say about your future before we officially sign off?
Um, I don't know. The job market this year is pretty bad, but I'm looking for a teaching or researching position in the North America. I think including both United States and Canada.
Uh-huh.
But there are very few positions open this year, so I don't know. I submitted several, a lot of job applications, but I'm still waiting.
Well, we want you here. wherever wherever you end up teaching, the students are really in for a treat. Um, thank you.
Thank you to.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. While we're waiting for Yupeng Jiao's book to come out, please buy my book. It's available at Amazon.com. And don't forget to subscribe.